The Women's Leadership Institute in the Auburn University College of Liberal Arts is pleased to present Leaders Educating Through Discussion. We hope you will take a moment after you watch our presentation to add your own voice to the dialogue on our website, auburn.edu/women's leadership.
When I went to graduate school, I had been out of school for a while, and so by the time I got to graduate school, I was really thirsty to get back into academic life and really valued it and really appreciated it. And as I look back on my life, the people that had always put on a pedestal were not political leaders, frankly, although there are many here. They weren't religious leaders per se. They weren't football players. They weren't professional athletes, but it was always teachers. And I always aspired to have their respect and their support. When I went to graduate school, both for my master's degree and for my doctorate, I never had a single female professor. And the way that impacted me, and not only me, but other female graduate students, is that we always felt inadequate. We always felt as though we didn't know enough, we didn't do enough, and we were always looking for validation of our competence. And so we'd go to the professor and say, is this okay? Should we read more? Oh yes, read more. Well, I turned in my 20-page paper. Are there more sources? Oh yes, get more sources. And we found ourselves just constantly trying to please, please, please. And our male friends were saying, you've done enough. Don't keep doing more sources. And we said, you can't say that to your professor that I've done enough. I mean, my goodness. And what we discovered is that why were the male graduate students seeing the world differently than the way we were seeing the world? And we finally figured it out. Once a week, the male graduate students would get together with many of the professors in the department and play basketball. So if you're in your 20s and you're playing basketball with men in their 40s, early and late 40s, who do you think is winning those games? The male graduate students. And after they play basketball, getting all hot and sweaty, they'd go get some refreshing drinks and sit around and pal around with each other. And we didn't have that experience, and we certainly weren't going to sit on the sidelines and cheer them on. So what happened is that the male graduate students were beginning to put themselves in situations where they put the professors off the pedestal a little bit, got to see them to be human beings, and got to see they weren't always perfect at everything. And it was a confidence builder for them that we didn't have. And so for those of you that ultimately go on to get a doctorate, and I'll tell you a little secret, there comes a point in your PhD, comes a point in getting your PhD in which you have to have enough confidence to say, I've done enough. And that's very hard as a student to tell a professor, I've done enough. And when you have 5 professors on the committee, as I had to have in Hawaii, and they come from different disciplines and different backgrounds, they have their own egos, they have their own agendas, and the more you say, have I done enough? And they'll say, no. And you keep seeking that. It has to come to a point where you know you've done enough. And you know you need to get out of that PhD program and you need to get on with your life because you're not going to solve every issue on your topic as a student that day. Life is a journey and education is a journey. So ultimately came to that, and I remember at one point after I did my proposal for my dissertation and presented to my committee members, and all 4 committee members loved it except I had one who didn't like it at all. And he didn't write to me, he wrote to my dissertation chair and said, I don't really think this is PhD quality work, and I think she needs to redo this. Well, this was a professor who didn't have a single publication to his name. And my committee chair said he thought it was fantastic and really cheered me on. And so when I got, my chair sent me the email. No, excuse me, there was no email back then. It was like a note in my mailbox. And I read it, and had I read that at an earlier point in my career, I would have been devastated. I would have just been devastated. But I read that, and at that point, I knew I had done enough. And I wrote to my dissertation chair, and I said, I'm sorry, I've done enough. And I'm not changing this one bit. He wrote back, good for you. So don't be obstinate, don't be difficult with your chairs, but there comes a point where you have to have that confidence that you know when you've done enough and you move on. Experience I had as a student is that fairly early on in my doctoral program, I married a professor. And he was a very distinguished professor, had many publications to his name. We had many values and research interests that were compatible. So sometimes I would join his research projects, and sometimes he would join my research projects. And one project that I had initiated and brought him in on was back in the late 1970s, in the Carter administration, they decided to experiment with mediation programs around the country. There was a lot of critique of adversarial process as a means of resolving certain types of dispute. And so mediation was being promoted in various circles around the country, and the federal government established 3 mediation centers that they funded as pilot projects. I was fascinated with this system, and I did a lot of research. I read about all the federal programs. I read about other programs that exist around the country. And I wrote a paper, a graduate paper, proposing that for the state of Hawaii. And then I got my husband to join me in a research project. We decided that what we would do at Hawaii is that we would start a mediation program at the university that would be a collaborative program between the community and the university, and would have students, faculty, and people from the community to mediate together and mediate all types of disputes. And we received funding to set up this mediation program. We decided we would go and visit 3 programs across the country and discover which system we liked best, and we had to bring a trainer out to Hawaii with a lot of experience to train the mediators. So we first went to San Francisco, a non-federally funded program that existed for a long time. We met the director, very personal man, very egalitarian in his approach, but his attitude is do it my way or it's not going to work. So we thought, thank you very much, it's a nice program, but we're going to visit 2 other centers. We went to a program in Atlanta that was one of the federally funded programs. It's run by a woman who was, at that time, did not have a law degree, did not even want to seek a law degree, later on got a law degree. And she arranged a really interesting day for us. She brought in mediators, she brought in people who had mediation successfully mediated. She took us around the office and introduced us to, to staff and volunteers. It was very interesting. But when she pulled us together to meet with mediators and to ask all the questions that we wanted to, we were sitting at a table, and I was sitting next to her at the table, and across from her were my husband and other mediators. And so, as we would ask questions, she always looked at him to answer questions. And so I thought, okay, so she finds him more interesting, whatever, than I am. So all her attention was focused on him. So finally, after a while, I began to ask questions. And in this situation, this was my research that he came in on. I had done the research. Before we went to visit these places, I had figured out what kinds of questions we need to ask, and he understood that, and there were other projects that I came in to assist him, but I was the major person with the questions to ask and what we need to do to find a good trainer. But always comfortable as a man to speak up, and even if he didn't have his facts there, he would ask questions. And so, as I sat there and listened to what was going on, I thought, he's not asking some of the most important questions, so I began to ask questions. And to my amazement, when she would answer questions, she would look directly at him, not at me, and say, well, Ted, I thought, am I invisible? Can I not be seen? And I thought, well, maybe it's because she's sitting next to me. It's difficult to make eye contact, and she's sitting right beside me. So after this meeting with the mediators, we met with her in her private office, and we both sat across from her, and she continued to exert the same behavior. So by the time the meeting was out, and keep in mind, both of us are going to decide who's going to be the trainer who's going to come to Hawaii. And she's telling us why she'd be the best trainer and why her program is the very best in the country, and we must do it her way, it's going to be the best way. By the time we get out of that meeting, I'm fuming. And while I was in the meeting, I was calm, and I was polite, but I was fuming. The moment we walked out of the building, like steam was coming out of my ears and coming out of my nostrils. I said to my husband, can you believe that behavior? How rude. He said, what's the problem? I said, she completely ignored me. She did? I said, yeah. I said, I was completely ignored the entire afternoon. She didn't look at me. She didn't ask a question. She didn't respond to my questions. I asked questions. She'd look at you. He said, you got too much ego in this thing. And I thought, yeah, you're getting too much ego stroking in this thing. But what he said to me, which I didn't really want to hear, get your PhD. You want to be taken seriously? Get your PhD. Get your credentials. It doesn't matter what you know. Get your PhD. So we go on to the next office that we were investigating. It was in New York City. And we were living in Hawaii at the time, a very multicultural environment that we both loved. And we wanted to make sure that people understood and appreciated what it's like to do mediation in a multicultural environment. We go to New York. We have an African-American director of the Institute of Mediation Conflict Resolution, and his assistant director is Hispanic. Their whole behavior and style is different. What do you want to know? How can we help you achieve your goals? And how can we be most effective at developing a terrific program for you in Hawaii? At that point, my husband understood the difference between the woman in Atlanta and the group we met in New York. A woman in Atlanta thought it was more important to impress the man than me, but I had 50% vote and who was going to come out to Hawaii. So we brought the trainers from Hawaii, from New York City. We developed a very successful program. We had referrals from the family court, from the prosecutor's office, from the police department, from the mayor's office of complaint. And about a year later, the city said our program was so strong, they wanted to set up a county-wide network of mediators. And we had competition for this training. And there was a woman who worked, so I don't really think it's all anti-female here, there was a woman who worked for the mayor of Honolulu, and the mayor was very popular. And one of the reasons he was popular is because he had this kind of grassroots approach to problems and had a big reputation for being a grassroots, people-oriented person. And he would take the credit for what his staff would do. And he had a woman, a very quiet, shy, modest, Japanese-American woman who ran his neighborhood commission. And whenever she made a decision, she always did her homework. And she investigated. She was not a flashy woman. If we had a presentation, she would not come to the room and sit in the front of the room. She'd sit in the back, and she'd observe, and she'd watch. And when she made decisions, they were always very strategic, based on paying attention. And so several different groups made their presentations to the city. And this woman saw these kind of flashy people in the room making a big approach. And what she did is that she looked at our program. She looked at our values in our program. She looked at the research that we had done. And this woman, just a little side note of this, a lot of people who live in Hawaii love to go to Las Vegas and gamble. It's a kind of fun thing they do, you know, and they think it's a big thing. And this lady happened to like to go to Las Vegas and gamble. But what she'd do, she liked to play the slot machines. I know that's one of the proper things to say here in Alabama today, but anyway, a little bit of background. The way she played the slot machines is that she'd sit for an entire day watching the machines. And when she found a machine that was beginning to pay off, she'd wait until the person left and she'd go choose which machine. And she hardly ever went to Vegas, but she didn't come back with a bunch of money. That also was her style at choosing and making decisions. She wasn't flashy, she didn't do a lot of talking, she didn't run right away to make a decision. She paid attention. And she chose our program, and she chose our program because she said, you folks have the value system, you have the substance behind what you're doing, and besides, I like Christa's thoroughness. So, you know, here we go from Atlanta where we ignored, and we go to a woman, and we trained 40 leaders in the city of Honolulu, and we did an island-wide network of mediation centers that were very successful.